Rachmaninoff. Today it's the king of the Etudes. I think is a symphonic epic tone poem, evocative and heroic. And it's probably the most important piano piece for the balance, the length of sound, of the affirmative sounding, almost like a chorale. And then by thirds. And then the brooding and the agitated, innerly questioning the status quo of the top of the melody. It's rhythmic and harmonic, is pounding and ostinato-like, but of the beat. 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 2 3 2 3 1 2 3 2 3 2 3 2 3 1 2 3 2 3 1 2 3, and biting on the beat when the melody is heard for a glimpse alone and harmonized. You can hear the melodic note blossom through the harmonizations. Have diminished the minor triads, the suspensions, and the inner chords have their own voice leading, but the melody is played by the weakest finger, the top. If he had wanted, he would give that power through the thumb of the chorale in the melody, like the last Etude, Opus 25 by Chopin. Now he does have in the consecutive non-climaxing moments in the Etude, which is more of an improvisatory throw rather than an organized form with ABA. It's more like A and more. Self-regenerating his energy towards what is 1 second of 3 peaks instead of going. Third concerto, like of his chordal, intense pulsing element, and instead of this he reaches to the baritone voice and the pulsing chords which are under in the melody in the opening at the top. And they're like pleading on the top, and this chorale, bass, no, in the screaming tips, but more like in the inner side of the viola, perhaps the upper cello part. The spectrum of the exponentially expanding sounds, not for the melody, but for the chordal project. And I find that to be the case in the opening. The weaker finger in the top is also a little bit, of course, for most of us, weaker finger. Probably his was nuclear pinky, because he wrote it for himself through his pianism. You cannot separate Rachmaninoff's pianism and Rachmaninoff's inspiration. It's the prolongation of the other, of the one. It's like him. It couldn't be more Rachmaninoff, and at the same time there is a sense of vulnerability in the heroic strength of this statement, which would be too strong and too established. Yet he used that in the opening, and all this instead of having used this, or could have he used that, or only tools of understanding how and when and how much predictably or not predictably he comes up with different ways of presenting the texture and the melodic line and the harmonic dressing, coating, and the rhythmic pulsing. All this combined, obviously, it's not just layered. Consecutive alternations. It's rather some kind of an impatience. The repeated notes of the beat, 2 3 1 2 3 2 3 in the triplets, which become 16th notes in the end of second page. When the overwhelming amount of power comes with pounding chords and chromatic poundings, passing tones on static chords, but he repeats these common notes, he doesn't hold them. And so the moving parts always overwhelm, again, the question of balance with the melodic line. That proceeds by sequences, drops, rising, in this case, rising by tritones. So you feel all these unsettled diminished sevenths chromaticisms, but then you have to still prevail. The length of sound before the melody decays. And the 16th notes, this time no more triplets, faster under it, become the sort of vibrato of the same held note, which by the pianistic fact decays. Of Rachmaninoff, which is always on the horizon line, never dropping. Breath, width, generosity. It's a symphonic, not colorization of the piano, more about the intensification and the depth and the height at the same time. And the piano, it's easy to reach a point where it bangs, because it's louder than loud, it's only more loud. It's almost a saturation of the sound for which one has strategically, I cannot even pronounce it, to drop. A progression. If not, it will be just a lot of shrieking sounds, and one has to always leave that little room for the extra exponential of the resonance. That these pounding chords have to be replayed inside the keys, and not ta 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 ta, but ta ha 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 ha, with an inner shape inside, perhaps not a hairpin, but something of a shaping, blossoming and reclosing. This way the melodic note, the B flat, and also the 2 against 3 allows for the second of the 2 to be heard, instead of if it was chosen by him to be in matching 8th notes by 3, it would be. To say it's bad. It's already marvelous. But the 2 against 3 slows down the melody and keeps it in the 4/4, while the accompaniment, pulsing chords are in 12/8. So you have a pulse overlapping. Anyway, the point of the story is that he goes from triplets to 16th notes in the opening. And then when he reaches the first climax, he drops back into the triplets, which slows down and gives more width than intensity and speed, and then, or tempo rather, and then when he settles for what might be, which it ends up not being, a B section. The 16th notes per beat, the sextuplets, the broken arpeggio. Well, all arpeggios are broken chords, but in this case you feel like some kind of lilting. Compared to the pounding of the chords. And so he goes from 3 in the beginning a beat to 4 16th notes in a beat, and now 6, but in piano, so it appears calm, but in fact it's faster. Has this incredible, rich, texturally speaking sequence, rising by step and then by third, and he introduces not only 2 voices in one hand, but he introduces a third voice. Every 2 beats later than the right hand. So the right hand and the left hand have these 3 parts, in fact, plus their arpeggios on the bottom. Like this orchestral writing is contrapuntal, but also pianistic in the sense of the arpeggiations and the chordal progressions and the pounding chords and then prevailing melodic lines. It's like being at high seas and feeling all the elements of the air and the water and the sun rays and the wind, literally taking in a swirl. And to control it, it becomes a bit of a problem, because if you control it too much, it rationalizes it, and you hear. And you start thinking, okay, every second or third time of the reproduction of the pattern in the sequence is guessable, but he always adds another amount of voice exchange, imitation, and you end up by building this 1.5 pages of dramatic rising, progressively louder, higher, bigger, brighter, and finally when it reaches the dominant, after the second peak, he reaches for the melody in the inside, which I mentioned earlier in the baritone part of the voicing. After all this build-up, you expect Chromatic Fantasy by Bach, Rachmaninoff. Thankfully he didn't do that. But the fact is that after this, before the coda, he has a third, and probably in dynamics 3F, loudest climax. Avoid pianistically to bang what cannot be tromboned enough, 16 violins neither, and all this intensity that the orchestra has in blossoming the sound, vibrato and breath and air and projection of sound, compared to the piano where the sound is projected at the moment of impactful ignition of the sound. And in order to layer and not play the accompaniment too soft, because then it would lack that drive, thrust, energy, and the melody not too loud, not to be banged and screamed. It's a make-believe of balance between pounding and singing, and at the same time phrasing with direction of line, with nobility of the phrasing, with the feeling that you go always in the two directions of the spectrum, the tip and the bottom. And I think the accompaniment here to avoid banging these is to play them from close-up. These octaves can be fingered 5, 4, 3, 5. Finger pedaled, not only pedaled. You have the thumb of the left hand glide on the keys. So this way, instead of hearing drops of eighth notes, to hear a flow, as if the left hand play with two hands would be close up but with intensity, and the right hand with two hands would be with fullness and warmth and depth. And of course, when you only have two hands, you want to avoid scream and boom. You want to bring it in the intensity rather than in the projection of the scream. So you could reach the peak and say, which is more noble even if it's not triple forte. Choices have to be made. Towards the end, he drops by changing a harmony from a bar to half bar to quarter bar on each beat. To each eighth note. So it's a rhythmic acceleration plus a chromatic descent, and all that dissonant. Hands are not in phase. By the time you resolve the appoggiatura, you play the next one. And that adds more to that sense of dramatic drop, step by step, in some kind of head. That a composer like Rachmaninoff, who was a pianist like Rachmaninoff, he reaches this capacity to compose a piece that has fragments of orchestration, suggestive, at the same time pianistically extremely driven and bright, virtuosic in the best sense of the Lisztian word of it, meaning. But also this Tchaikovskyan sense of drama in the operas or the ballets or the symphonies. And combine that with this kind of elegance of Chopin. Berlioz used to say that Chopin kept dying all the time when finishing with chromatic scales down almost each of his pieces. Well, that's what Rachmaninoff does too. And he takes the would have been B section for the coda. It's interesting to observe that he finishes completely without any more trying even to go for another climax. He just lets it totally sort of end by its own tiredness. Like longing for more. Of my childhood, always improvising at the end of the piece. But in fact, at the end of this piece, we realize that the famous two or three moments where you can say that's the climax and then after is the aftermath, he seems to always restart and insert and then build up and then have this moment of sheer energy that opens or agonistic harmonizations and then the sense of chromatic rising. In between which we speak of legato. Chordal, almost you could call it drawing on the ostinato of the high chord of 6/4 E flat from above under has its own life and the melody the large values of the eighth notes by 2 versus those by 3 and the one could be tempted for rationalization to make sure that each climax is followed by a proper down and then afterwards we rise and finish. He sort of prefers to leave it so spontaneous in the way the flow of emotion flies. It's almost like watching a cascade of water. And you can capture a moment and capture another section, capture a sunrise, a sun rays on the water and something, but it's constantly flowing and going and there are pieces like this which I still think seem so evident, self-evident for their existence for our repertoires, regardless of people's personal tastes or personal preferences, for interpretations, for composers. Oh, I prefer Scriabin to Rachmaninoff, blah blah. Yeah, good, but it's there. And there was a day it wasn't there. And I'm very thankful that he wrote it. For himself, not for our hands, for his chordal technique, not for ours, but we adapt. I think there's a point where the interpretation becomes sense of appropriation, and you feel like somehow while you play it, you're making it up, even if you play precisely what he wrote. I don't speak about taking licenses here with the piece in terms of freedom, but it does the impression that it lives with the audience. And I think that had it been rationally rearranged in some kind of a organized frame shape, I think it would have had not this same impactful succession of waves that overtakes you differently each time it comes. Each time it rises and each time it drops. And at the end, he just let it sort of dry to the shore. Yeah. Thank you.